What's going on, guys? It's the Clown Review, and we're back with another video and another review of Netflix's series of unfortunate events. Today, I'll be reviewing episodes 7 and 8 of Season 1, which constitutes the fourth book of the series titled The Miserable Mill. Before I get into the video, I would really appreciate it if you like the video and subscribe, and if you have any feedback you want to give, please feel free to leave it down in the comments. We start with Mr. Poe reacting to the Baudelaires running away. He's really frightened, he's panicked, he has no idea what to do because this whole entire structure depends on him taking the Baudelaires to the next Guardian, but now the Baudelaires have run away, so he can't do any of that. It's a very strong reaction, kind of like his reaction in the reptile room to seeing Sunny with Snake, but we all know Mr. Poe kind of deserves it. This is all really his fault. However, Mr. Poe immediately somehow gets distracted by some really good chowder and forgets all about the Baudelaires, which again tells you how much he really cares about them. And thank God Mr. Poe isn't in either of these two episodes very much. He's here at the beginning, shows up in the middle, and then at the end. And in my opinion, these two episodes are by far the best two of the season. The others were good. They were still good. I liked them. But these two are by far the best episodes in the series. And I think that's because Mr. Poe doesn't show up for the entire second episode and kind of make it super annoying. So back to the Baudelaires. They're noticed by the driver that they hitched a ride on, and they're thrown out of the truck. And they have to walk the 2 remaining miles to Lucky Smells lumber mill. They get there, but everything has burnt down except for the lumber mill. And the name of the town is Paltryville. The whole town except for the lumber mill burnt down. The kids wonder if this is where all the mysteries from the safe at Aunt Josephine's house to the statue and the note at Uncle Monty's house have led them. So the kids basically face a decision whether they want to actually find out what's happening or what they don't. They end up entering the lumber mill, and there's a funny sequence with them trying to leap the wall and figure out how to get it when the answer is kind of the most obvious thing ever. I bring this up because there's not a lot of humor in this episode, unlike the previous episodes where even the last two, which are really depressing, there was a lot of humor. In these two, there's some, but there's not a lot of humor. But I think it works because there's so much going on in the story and there's so much to do with the characters. They don't really have time to insert a lot of humor. Klaus immediately does not like the place. He says we have to get out of here, especially after seeing the tower with Count Olaf's tattoo symbol on it. He's like, it could be Count Olaf, it's connected, we have to get out of here. But Violet really wants to figure out what's going on and what their parents were hiding and all the mysteries. So the children are found by Charles, the co-owner of the lumber mill, but are taken to Sir, his quote-unquote partner, after showing Charles the photo that they've been using to get there. But it's pretty clear Charles is not Sir's partner in terms of authority, just a name. Sir is really the one in charge of everything. And they have a little back and forth. Sir basically says, no, we got to put them to work here. They have to work. They're trespassers, and it's basically free labor. But after Violet kind of gains Sir's respect after making like saying we get to stay here. So he asks her for her name, and she gives it, and then he has a visceral reaction when he realizes they're the Baudelaires because of something their parents did. And there's not much humor, but there's some, because there's the fourth wall break here where Sir starts coughing just when he's about to tell them everything, and then Klaus is like, seriously, again? This happens every time we're about to get some answers, and that's kind of how the audience feels right now. We're like, yeah, can we stop with this? Like, every time anybody's about to tell them anything, this thing happens, but luckily it's only temporarily. And Sir basically tells them that their parents are the ones who burnt down the town, which you can tell has an impact on the children because they've always thought of their parents as being good people, and they're clearly raised the right way. So having that piece of information just thrown at them, like after trying to figure out what they did, and their parents being so mysterious, it clearly starts a conflicting thought process in their mind. So we cut to the truck driver that the Baudelaires hitched a ride with, and he is giving Olaf a ride now, because I guess Olaf didn't hitch a ride. He went there, and so the truck driver was actually happy to give them a ride. I don't know. Olaf indicates he has a history with Paltryville, especially one of its residents. By the way, the truck driver also tells them where he dropped the Baudelaires. I guess all the adults in this world, except for Larry and Jacqueline, are against them. I don't know. But yeah, the truck driver tells Olaf where the Baudelaires are. Olaf indicates he has a history with Paltryville, and that he has an ex-lover there. And the sequence of Olaf giving the driver a fake cash is also pretty funny. There's a cool analogy of 3 workers that basically look like an older version of the Baudelaires and their skill sets. One of them is biting a lot of stuff. There's another one with glasses reading something, and then you have like someone that like looks like a much older version of Violet, and it's nice timing because Nick, it kind of narrates the Baudelaires took the information that their parents had burned down the town, and it looked like they had aged them 1,000 years, but it really hadn't. And they kind of zoom in over to the 3 mill workers that are kind of their counterparts. So I thought that was neat. We're then introduced to Phil, who is very optimistic about everything, and he's pretty much the only one in the entire mill that does, as far as we know right now, that doesn't believe the Baudelaire parents burnt down the town. And he kind of takes them in. I guess he's the one. He's kind of their intermediary. He kind of helps the Baudelaires get adjusted to the town, and they try to be a bit optimistic on their own. I mean, to be completely fair, this can't really be the worst situation they've been in. Living wise, sure, it's not a great place to live, but they're not. At least they don't have to depend on Mr. Poe to do everything, because Mr. Poe's not in charge of them, because nobody's in charge of them really, which I love. And Count Olaf hasn't shown up yet. So the Baudelaires try to stay there, and Violet thinks maybe this is the place where Count Olaf won't find them, and there's a reason Count Olaf's connected to their parents and all the people in the photo. There has to be something there. But, of course, she's wrong, because immediately Count Olaf visits Dr. Orwell, his ex, who's the one that lives in that eye tower, the one with the tattoo on it. And she's pretty much shocked when she hears his voice. And I love how Olaf tries to like get her back. It's hilarious. He goes like, "Life is so short. It's so rare to meet one." And then she's just shaking her head like, "No, I've been through this BS before, Olaf. I'm not falling for this." But she does eventually open up, and she clearly has no interest in working with Olaf. But then he mentions that they can get back at the Baudelaires, which implies that Dr. Orwell had some history with the Baudelaire parents, and now they're getting back at their children, and it's more than just about getting their money, because Count Olaf kind of like, when he uses that as a temptation, he clearly knows there's something about this whole interaction with the Baudelaires and Dr. Orwell sometime in the past. So what I find interesting is these 2 episodes have the most going on outside of the kids' lives. We see the most of the subplot. We see the most of the parents' plot, which I'll get to that. But yet, it's overall focused a lot more on the Baudelaires themselves and their relationships than any of the previous ones. For the first time in the story, Violet and Klaus have conflicting interests. Klaus wants to get out of the mill immediately, while Violet recognizes that the mill isn't a great place to live, especially with everyone believing their parents to be arsonists. But they can find out their parents' secrets if they stay, and Count Olaf isn't here, so that it may still be worth it. There's a really good sequence with the kids discussing their parents. Since the story slowed down in the last episode, there's a lot more of the kids reminiscing about their parents, which really works, and we didn't get to see in the first half, but we are really getting to see in the second half of this season. The kids unequivocally believe that the parents didn't start the fire, however. And then we cut to the parents. So I complained a lot about this in the last episode, but I'm starting to believe it's more of a tactic than a flaw in writing. There's going to be some sort of twist with their parents, especially with their presence hovering over the lumber mill in the main story. The parents are the reason they're there in the first place, and they're the reason everyone hates them. And in the side plot, the parents imply that they do things that might not be so great. So maybe they did set the fire, and they're going to tell the kids everything when they get back. And so there's an interesting parallel after the parents. You know, obviously, because we see 3 kids in the mansion waking up, and the Baudelaires in the lumber mill. Unlike the mansion, may be an analogy to what the Baudelaires' lives were before the fire, and now what they are, where they're being woken up by a loud banging in the lumber mill. And the sequence of the Baudelaires' work in the mill is great. Like, you see, like, their children, they're completely unfamiliar with any of this, of how working in a mill is like, all the sawdust, all of the machines, and just how hard it is. Like, you see the guy at the beginning say, "I hate log days," and then, like, Klaus eventually comes around during the break and says, "I hate log days." And the music is great. The 2 episodes, it's not a horror episode, but they do have, like, a kind of horror theme, and I love the music, but the music is also has kind of horror elements in it. It's kind of horror, slightly horror music. It's not complete horror, it's only slightly. And the children try to figure what's going on, but they're kind of scared because this is the first time they've been on their own, and it's like running away in the moment when you think of it. It seems so easy, but like, if you actually have to do it, it's like, well, we find out, yeah, maybe it's not so easy, you know? But the workers are basically fed gum in their breaks, and they're paid in coupons. They're not paid anything. It's basically a way to exploit them and get free labor. But they're perfectly happy, and they suspiciously never want to leave. And the way they say it, like, they all stand up at once to say, Lucky Smiles is our life, Lucky Smiles is our home. And the Baudelaires find this, like, really strange, like, and Klaus is like, we need to find the answers and get out of here, because this place is not right. But so the Baudelaires try to visit the library to find some answers, but they're stopped by Sir, and once again, Charles doesn't stand up to him, and this becomes an important plot throughout the episode. Klaus still wants to leave the place, and Violet still wants to stay, Violet's like, well, Count Olaf's not here, but Klaus thinks the foreman, I forgot to mention, there was apparently a new foreman that came in overnight, and apparently happens a lot around here, but Klaus starts to suspect the foreman might be Count Olaf. And he tries to check the ankle, but then there's kind of a sequence where the foreman notices and kind of bosses him and plays around with him a bit, and then he just knocks him over and breaks his glasses. And then Klaus has to be sent to Dr. Orwell to get his glasses repaired. And the foreman is implied to be one of Olaf's henchmen, which we eventually find out he is. The foreman's Hooky. It's a hook-handed man, and he just has those gloves over his hand, but when he points his hand, it's pretty obvious it's fake. So, Violet then leaves the mill to sit in the library and find some answers, and it's kind of cute how she uses Klaus's methods to find the information in the book that she's like, whenever Klaus reads a long book, he looks at the table of contents. And the book suspiciously said, the Baudelaires were unequivocally responsible, and the chapter was named The Paltryville Fire, but then the rest is crossed out. So she basically takes out as many books as she can. She finally finds the one that's not crossed out, but then Sir returns and she has to hide. And then Sir finds it, he rips out the page, and then just leaves it there. So Sunny also finds a dictionary, and it has their father's handwriting in it. So now it's like kind of the confirmation that their father was there, their parents were there, they did have something to do with this lumber mill. And speaking of the parents, we also see a scene where they basically have to face this refrigerator repair person, and it's pretty funny that, like, I guess they just asked him for a ride, and then he's really a jerk about it, and then he just takes out a giant wrench, and then they're pretty awesome. The parents are pretty awesome, like I said, and they basically have to just take him down so they have a vehicle to use. And there's also a great Gatsby reference where Klaus points out, like, the glasses in front of Dr. Orwell's office as similar to the eyes of T.J. Eckelberg in, I think that was the name of the thing, in The Great Gatsby. So Charles basically then asks her why they quote-unquote have to lie to the children, referring to the not the Baudelaire fire, the Paltryville fire, and he said, the truth is right there in your book. And then Sir says he made a deal with somebody to blame the fire on the Baudelaires, and Violet hears this. And she doesn't hear the whole, like, blame the fire on them, but she heard that Sir made a deal to cover up something. So Klaus then has to visit Dr. Orwell, and it's a nice tactic used by the writer. We know Dr. Orwell is working with Olaf. The children don't know, even though Klaus is suspicious. It's like we're screaming at him, no, she's evil, don't do this, but he kind of has to, and he's slowly walking to his doom. Dr. Orwell mentions while she's getting Klaus set for the quote-unquote exam that she did know their parents, and he's just really scared and confused while she's setting up the procedure, and then she starts the eye exam. And I love the way Dr. Orwell does this. Klaus slowly becomes more and more confused, but realizes what's happening just before it happens, but it's already too late, and he can't stop it. We don't know what yet, but he is hypnotized here, and the last thing he hears is Count Olaf's voice. So Klaus is gone for a really, really long time, and Violet's really worried about him. Klaus finally returns, but it's really, really late, and he's clearly not himself. He doesn't even acknowledge Violet or hear anything she says. He only registers Sir. And the moment she realizes he doesn't recognize her is when he says, I'm happy to be here, Sir. And she responds saying, I'm not Sir, I'm your sister. And that's the moment that hits because we realize what's been done to Klaus. It's unclear at the beginning, like, it's just like, the first time I watched this, I was really confused when I watched that scene. I was like, wait, what just happened? And then Klaus just came back, and I'm like, Oh, when that happened, yeah, that's when we realize he's not right. But Violet tries to tell him what's been going on, but Klaus not only isn't listening, he practically isn't even there. He doesn't know she's there. She doesn't register her presence. And she realizes something is seriously wrong with her brother, but she can't do anything about it since he basically won't talk at all. So Klaus has basically been turned into a zombie, and Violet takes a lot of responsibility for this, not just as his older sister, or because she promised her parents she'd look after him, but because he wanted to leave. He found the place strange. He knew there was something suspicious, but she forced him to stay, and she feels really guilty, and feels like it's all her fault. And that makes you realize all the siblings have left is each other, and you can see the impact it has on Violet and Sunny when Klaus effectively disappears because he's pretty much gone. This is just a shell of him. It's the next day, and a hypnotized Klaus basically picks up Sunny and follows the foreman's command and ends up holding Sunny over a wood chipper while he's doing his work. Now, luckily for them, Sunny doesn't end up dying, but the implications are pretty harsh when he holds her over there, and the gears are there. It's like I said, it has a semi-horror tone, and Violet tries to stop him, but nothing gets through to him. Meanwhile, Sir is called by a mysterious, unidentified person about the Baudelaires, and he does a pretty bad job pretending they aren't there. He's like, oh, wherever they are, which definitely isn't here. And then the parents are on the other end of the line. They were calling Sir. And now they're seemingly driving towards Lucky Smell's lumber mill, and they say, we'll finally see our children again. And it's at this point in the story where they're not even being subtle with the implications that it's the Baudelaire parents anymore. However, there is likely a twist, as I said, having to do with the fire, and the parents' presence is, as I said, hovering over the entire story, which is probably why they chose this episode to have the plots merge. So Klaus is basically now operating the same as all the other mill workers they saw the other day, and and then Violet finally gets through to him. She says that she this is not our home. A home is where people feed you and take care of you, not where you work in a mill for gum. I miss you an inordinate amount, and that last part is what breaks the hypnosis. But they don't really have time to register this. Klaus is just back again. But then immediately after that, the Baudelaires are told to go to a very fancy door because they have visitors. And I'm just gonna say it. This next scene is my favorite of the entire series so far, and I'm gonna try and break it down as best as I can, because the first time I watched this, it really shook me. At the same time, the parents are standing in front of a large yellow door. Charles leads the Baudelaires to the door, and it's the same yellow door that the parents are on the other side of. Both the children and the parents walk towards the door, the parents knowing what they'll find, and the children left to wonder. The parents start to open the door. We cut back to the children and see the door opening. They push it forward, still zoomed in on the parents, as they call out to their children. The kids look at each other, wondering if what they're hearing is really true. This is repeated once more. The parents call children. Violet, Klaus, and Sunny all look at each other, shocked. And then it happens. Every movie or show has that moment where it all comes together, that scene where you're left silent because it works so well. And if you're a critic, you understand these writers know what the hell they're doing. The Marvel movies have those type of movements in every great one. Rogers dropping the shield, the snap, Spider-Man lifting the rubble. I'm always angry. I'm with you till the end of the line. This is that moment. The show cuts to the next frame with the parents, but now we see the background. A beautiful front yard with grass, trees, and a spotless driveway. It all happens at once. The parents that are lost reunite with their children who have been missing them dearly. A beautiful family reunion. The fairy tale we all imagined. But the parents have for the first time called the children by their names. Duncan, Quigley, and Isadora.
Children? Children! Duncan, Quigley, Isadora! Mother? Father!
Just as the Baudelaires' door opens, Lemony Snicket cuts the story off when we slightly see who the Baudelaires are seeing, but don't fully know yet. Snicket doesn't change his intentions. He doesn't tell us anything he didn't before. He gives us our final warning to turn the show off now, to imagine the happy ending we all envisioned a few seconds ago. But it's too late. We, the viewer, have seen too much, and we have to know the answer. And then it hits us all at once, as Snicket narrates the cruel twist. Imagine a happy ending, that the woman at the door is a loving parent you thought you'd never see again. And then it hits like a rail of bricks, harder than ever before. The Baudelaire parents are dead. They're dead, and they're never coming back. There's no goodbyes, no messages, no old letters recovered. They were alive one day, and then they died, and that's it. It was always too good to be true. We never should have believed it. They gave us no reason to think the children would ever reunite with their lost parents. Lemony Snicket warned us from the beginning. He told the viewer not to watch. He set our expectations as awful as they could be. And yet we watched, and waited, and hoped. Because in the deepest parts of our mind, we knew the Baudelaire children would have to see their parents again to give the story a satisfying ending. We knew they wouldn't just leave them hanging. The parents' presence loomed over the story, from their grief to all the mysteries they left behind. We felt that despite all the terrible events the children had to endure, all the missing holes in their lives, the parents were out there. They would eventually find them, and once they did, maybe their lives would make some sort of sense. And at last, the two stories came together through the sorry episode. The parents may not be what we envisioned, but they were still there. The cool and awesome parents that had adventures, escaped jails, flew through hurricanes, fought enemies in countless battles, and were finally on the way to reunite with their desperate children who needed them more than ever. They, more than anyone, were the true guardians, capable of everything the previous guardians had failed to do. And it happened. We saw the fairy tale, the happy reunion, but the story of the Baudelaire orphans is not a fairy tale. It's a series of unfortunate events. Because while the fairy tale happens, the parents reunite with the children from the mansion. The Baudelaires never get to see their parents again. They're stuck in the lumber mill, have nowhere to go, and are kept there for the sole reason of figuring out the secrets in their lives. After being traumatized by a villainous optometrist and breaking free, the Baudelaire children watch as their worst enemy walks through the door. And Lemony Snicket gives us the final punch as he said, "You should be asking one question, and that question is, where is Count Olaf?" As the very fancy door did not grant them the fairy tale reunion with their parents. Instead, it put a cap to their misery and injected the cruel reality of their circumstances back into the story. For walking through that door was none other than Count Olaf, and Klaus watched in horror as the glasses descending onto his face, and Olaf used the words, "lucky boy." Klaus's eyes swirl once again and responds with nothing but a simple, "Yes, sir." Count Olaf and Dr. Orwell can do nothing but smile, while Violet and Sunny watch with misery as their only companion. Alright, this was one of the best fake-outs I've ever seen. And I don't mean as a twist, like the reveal of a plan, an identity, a relationship, or an entire plotline. I mean when a side plot is built up, we wait and wait for it to be important, to get the result, and for the two sides to meet. Only in the end we realize it was never real. They were never the Baudelaire parents. They never mentioned the Baudelaires at all. They never mentioned their names. They were in a picture, but there was more than one couple in that picture. And I gotta admit, I didn't see it coming. I knew there would be a twist. But because the parents had such a large presence in the episode, I assumed it was the parents, and the twist would maybe be that maybe they weren't such great people after all. They did things that they'd regret. They maybe started the fire, maybe had something to do with it, or maybe it had something to do with the original mystery of who burned the house. Never did I think the writers would have the guts to pull off something like this. Throughout these reviews, I've had to re-record my notes on the parents more than any other section, because there were times I accidentally spoiled the scene and couldn't help but take it into account when reviewing the episode. I cut it out so I could review each episode objectively, based on itself. These writers have some real guts. This wasn't in the books at all. They knew people always complain about added plot lines that weren't in the books, especially when they ruined the tone of a story that has something important. And yet they went through with it. And in the end, not only did the parents' twist fit the story, it enhanced the story. The tone of the series is how awful things are for the children. No matter what happens, anytime there's something positive, it's always too good to be true. It's never going to last. The next unfortunate event is right around the corner waiting for them. But the subplot of the parents always muted that for the moment, because we knew the parents were always there, looking for them, ready to take them back and explain everything. But ultimately, the parents did not detract from that tone. They added to it, because the biggest example of something being too good to be true, of an unfortunate event taking all the happenings away, was the parents' twist. The funny thing is, the main characters, the Baudelaires, didn't even know about these set of parents being alive. The twist is not for them. It's not even involving them. It's solely for the audience. And that's an example of how good the writing is. When you can feel emotions for the main characters in a twist that doesn't even involve them, something they know nothing about. The twist practically mocks the audience for ever believing what we were sold, but it works. I talk a lot about how bad writing ruins stories more than anything, but when you have great writing, you get scenes like this that really, really work. Snicket cut the story for the narration at the perfect time. We see what happens, get that while listening to Snicket's voice, we get the time to really let it sink in and hit us while he gives us the confirmation. The best part is, even though the Baudelaires aren't even part of the twist, you can tell there's a part of them deep down that's hoping for a miracle. Even though they know nothing about the set of parents, they're hoping it might be their parents coming back, even though they know they're dead. Kind of like Klaus wished for earlier in the episode. They don't even have any idea just how close it was to happening. And their low hopes are finally extinguished as Count Olaf walks through that door. And finally, there is still the mystery of who called the lumber mill about the Baudelaires. We thought it was the parents, but they weren't their parents at all. Turns out it was Mr. Poe, who was looking for the Baudelaires, and actually bought the answer Serge gave. Yeah, of course, why wouldn't he buy the answer? It's Mr. Poe. And of course, he crosses Lucky Smell's lumber mill off the list of possible destinations, further solidifying our proof that Mr. Poe is a complete idiot that has no idea what he's doing. So that was part 1. Now let's move on to part 2. We pick up with Mr. Poe's search for the orphans. And Mr. Poe is once again very dramatic about this situation. He's coughing so much, he's practically crying about this. And he is unable to find the Baudelaires. He has so many pictures up, searching for them. He's looking for everywhere they might be, but he can't find them. He kind of deserves this, to be honest. This is all his fault. He put the Baudelaires in the care of Count Olaf. Then he didn't believe them when they complained about him, and then it was too late by the time he finally did something. Then he took them to Uncle Monty's house. Then, after Count Olaf killed Uncle Monty, he didn't believe them that Count Olaf was Stefano, and that he killed Uncle Monty, once again, until it was too late. And worst of all, then he took them to Aunt Josephine's house, and then he believed the word of a random sailor that had no credibility and that he just met over the Baudelaires. Once again, Mr. Poe was wrong, the Baudelaires were right. 3-0 Baudelaires to Mr. Poe, and he still doesn't believe them, so they just ran away. They ran away, and now his job is in jeopardy. And honestly, it does seem like all he cares about is his promotion, because he's crying about, I was going to get a promotion if I hadn't lost the orphans. And Mr. Poe's wife literally tries to knock some sense into him. It's like, he just slaps him, like, get a hold of yourself. Just stop. Mr. Poe is acting like a maniac, and his wife just smacks some sense into him. And I'm starting to think, maybe I was a bit too harsh on Poe in the last episode. I did just mention how he's mostly worried about the promotion, and he is. He's mostly worried for his job. But it is clear there is some level of care for the kids he has, and what they might be facing on their own. Because nobody would react this much just over possibly being demoted, even when, especially when your boss tells you, I've been told I can't let you go. So, it has to be something personal. There's no way Mr. Poe's reaction is entirely over the promotion. So he does have some level of care for the children after being put in charge of them. But, at the same time, it's really hard to feel bad for him. I mean, it's sick seeing Poe like this, but it's really hard to feel bad for him after everything he did. So Mr. Poe basically faints, he can't do anything, and his wife, Eleanor Poe, basically vows to use her investigative journalist skills to try and find the Baudelaires. And then we get a transition to Lemony Snicket narrating and bringing us back to the main events of the story at the lumber mill, and we get some confirmation that Lemony Snicket is widely considered to be dead. So when we get back to the Baudelaires, Klaus has been hypnotized again by the word lucky boy, so I guess those are the hypnotizing words. And, well, we don't get to that. They don't know it's hypnosis yet, but we know it's hypnosis. The Baudelaires don't know yet. Violet, of course, immediately recognized that The receptionist standing next to Dr. Orwell is Count Olaf, and Count Olaf does standard intimidation tactics, except now Dr. Orwell is there, and he has somebody he's working with, besides his henchpeople, obviously. Sir and Charles arrive, and obviously neither of them recognizing Count Olaf. That's fine. They've never met him. They're in a distant lumber mill that's nowhere near the city, so it makes sense that they've never heard of him. And Sir can probably tell something's weird, but as it's revealed later, he really doesn't care, as long as everything's working in the lumber mill. All he really cares about is the lumber mill. And it's hinted here, but revealed later, ultimately, that quote-unquote Shirley, I guess Count Olaf's disguise is now as Dr. Orwell's receptionist, and the name is Shirley, apparently. And it's hinted that they did meet with Sir along with Dr. Orwell. And then, basically, the foreman calls them back to work, and Klaus is once again basically a zombie, and Violet's desperation is clearly increasing as she doesn't know what to do, because now Klaus is hypnotized again, and he's just following the foreman's instructions like a zombie. And Klaus starts to operate a stamping machine that imprints Lucky Smells logo onto planks, and other workers are just moving around the planks. Klaus has no idea how to operate a machine like that, as Violet mentioned, and he looks, again, zombified while doing that. And speaking of zombies, so Violet is basically talking to Phil to try and figure out what the heck is going on with Klaus, and he mentions a movie he watched called Hypnotist in the Forest, and that's when she realizes, wait, he's being hypnotized. That's what Dr. Orwell did to him when she went to check his eyes. So all of a sudden, the foreman doesn't help any of this. The foreman is really hooky, so we know he's trying to advance Count Olaf's plot, but he doesn't help anything by forcing everything to go faster. Everything goes faster. Everything goes haywire. Klaus sets the machine to high speed. It starts hitting everyone and destroys some of the machinery. And all of a sudden, he breaks the wire, so it can't be stopped. And then Phil is knocked into the center of the planks. The stamper from the machine is right about to stamp Phil right into the plank, and it's probably going to kill him. And then we cut to Lemony Snicket. So Snicket gives some information on hypnosis and foreshadows somebody's going to die in this episode, but it's not Phil. Because the stamp thing, it hit Phil's leg. And everyone's trying to lift it. Nobody's able to. It's really heavy. And Klaus is just standing in the corner doing nothing because he's hypnotized. And then Violet steals someone's gum, chews it, and uses it to fix the machine. And Phil is free, but his left foot is it's completely crushed. But from the part between his knee and his foot, that part is completely flattened. And it looks pretty brutal. Sir arrives because he heard the foreman was shouting Code Red, and Sir finally arrives. And the only thing he cares about, the only part of the accident he cares about is that the DeBarker dispenser is destroyed. He doesn't care that anything's happened to Phil. He doesn't want to know what happened. He just the DeBarker dispenser destroyed. Who caused this? And obviously Klaus caused the accident. And he threatens the children. Well, I'm going to send you somewhere where you'll learn the value of child labor and discipline. And Sir clearly has no problem lying through his teeth, because we know that the Baudelaire's parents didn't really set the fire because Sir covered it up. He made a deal to blame the fire on the Baudelaires, and he just lies through his teeth again and says, you're just like your parents who burnt down the town, and you've come back to finish the job. And he's just lying through his teeth. But he also says something that unhypnotizes Klaus, who wakes up and he has no idea what just happened. Violet convinces Charles to take a stand for himself against Phil, but once again, he can't give them any answers right now. He has to wait till later, and we know what's going to happen. Something's going to happen that prevents Charles from giving them the actual answers, like it happens throughout the entire series. So Charles can't give them the answers. He says, I'll meet me later at lunch. And Klaus just comes back and he's like, what the hell just happened? Why is everyone staring at me? What's going on? Because he just woke up. I guess from Klaus's point of view, what happened is he went to Dr. Orwell's office. Then he randomly wakes up. He sees Count Olaf arrive, but then he randomly wakes up again, and now everybody's looking at him strange. So that would be really confusing and disorienting for him. So we get the reveal that there was a secret meeting between Dr. Orwell, Sir, and quote-unquote Shirley, really Count Olaf, after the Baudelaires arrived at the lumber mill. Shirley had requested to adopt the Baudelaires, but given their economic value, Sir is not going to let go of them unless they become quote-unquote costly and cause major accidents. And it's pretty clear how Shirley is not credible. We see several times that it's kind of a joke. Shirley grabs a pen and throws it on the table and starts talking with Dr. Orwell, and it's clear it's Count Olaf is shady, but again, Sir doesn't really care. It's not like Mr. Poe, who's just being so stupid that he can't see it's Count Olaf. This is first of all, Sir doesn't even know who Count Olaf is, and second, he really doesn't care as long as he's getting as his mill is operating fine, and his deal with Dr. Orwell has supposedly been going pretty well, and we get what the deal is. She basically does something to the workers. They're basically just willing to work for Sir, and they split the profits. So that's how Dr. Orwell makes her money. And we cut back to the Baudelaires, and Klaus can't believe what he just did once Violet tells him everything, and it's personal for him now. He has to figure out and fix what Dr. Orwell did to him. And I love the next scene. So Klaus and Violet's priorities have now flipped. Now Klaus is the one that wants to stay and fix things, and he points out why Violet wanted them to stay. But now things have changed. She doesn't care about that anymore. She doesn't care about their parents or the fire or why everyone blames them. She just wants Klaus to be safe more than anything else. And walking right into Dr. Orwell's office, where Count Olaf is probably there, is the opposite of that. And because Count Olaf's here, she's like, we have to leave. But Klaus is undeterred because, as I said, his mind's been messed with, and that probably, that creates something where it's not just about trying to figure things out anymore. This is personal now because these people mess with my mind. So he's undeterred and he goes by himself. Consequences be damned. But before he can leave, Violet grabs his hand, and basically the message is clear. If Klaus is going, they're all going together. And the scene is really, really sweet. So we then cut to Count Olaf and Dr. Orwell. I guess they're dealing with what you call relationship troubles, and they're having their evil speech exchange or whatever it is. And the Baudelaires finally reach Dr. Orwell's office, and as you could probably have guessed, the next patient that she's hypnotizing is Charles. And the Baudelaires are upstairs, they're hiding and watching what's happening, and they see how the process works. One word hypnotizes the subject, and the other one wakes them up. That's basically what they put together. And yeah, there is a funny sequence in here where Count Olaf basically comes up and Dr. Orwell's about to say what the word is, and Count Olaf basically has Charles uses Charles to do some funny things, and they basically have an argument, another relationship argument, I guess. And you say Charles, can you tell Dr. Orwell to blah blah blah? And then he does that, and then she's can you tell Count Olaf to stop talking in that voice? And he's stop talking in that voice, and it's really funny. But there's some noise upstairs. I don't think it's a noise from where the Baudelaires were, but there's some noise. Count Olaf has to go up, and the Baudelaires are forced to hide in the closet. And in this closet, there are actual real skeletons, implying that maybe Dr. Orwell is more than just an evil doctor. She might actually have things to do with some murders, but they don't really focus on that much. They just show the skeletons in the closet, and Lemony kind of makes a little speech about what means to have skeletons in your closet, and he drops some more hints about this mysterious Beatrice that he opens every chapter writing to. He's kind of devoting the story to her, and we saw her grave in the previous episodes, and now he talks about how he has a long letter explaining why she couldn't marry him. So Klaus finds some medical records of the entire mill and realizes that the entire lumber mill has been hypnotized. And that's pretty obvious. As soon as we found out it was hypnosis, it's pretty clear. The entire mill has been hypnotized, and that's why they never leave and are willing to work for coupons, as well as why they think the Baudelaire parents started the fire. And they realize they just have to remember the words Sir said after the accident, but Violet can't remember. So now the Baudelaires have to make a choice. And for the first time, they actually have some sort of control over their own fate. In the previous episodes, they always had to stay in either Uncle Monty's house or Aunt Josephine's house or Count Olaf's house or whatever designated guardian that Mr. Poe had set for them. But now they ran away from Mr. Poe, they no longer are in that structure, and if they really want to, they can just run away from the mill. They're not hypnotized, Klaus isn't hypnotized anymore, nothing's stopping them. And I like this because for the first time, the characters actually have to make a serious choice. It's not in the previous episodes. It was just a structure. They were doing whatever they had to, and now they have to make their first big choice as to whether they can just run away or they go back and try and fix things. And Klaus is unhypnotized, so Violet's like, we don't have to stay here at all. We can run away. And the exchange between the siblings is great. This episode, more than anything, demonstrates how close they are, especially since their parents' death, because they're all they have. And Klaus notes they can't protect each other if he's under hypnotic trance, because Count Olaf can just find them again, and then Klaus would just be hypnotized again, and they have no idea what to do. And most importantly, they would be abandoning the mill workers, because now they know they're hypnotized too, and they're victims of Dr. Orwell also. And I feel like the reason Klaus feels more sympathetic with that than Violet is because Klaus is also hypnotized, and he knows exactly what it feels like. And then we get to the best part of the scene. The Baudelaire children finally address their parents' death fully.
Our parents wanted us to be safe. We don't know what they wanted. Not anymore. We don't know why they were in Poltraville. We don't know why there were so many things they never told us. But we do know how we remembered them. And the parents I remember would have wanted us to help. Then we go back.
Up till this point, we've seen 4 stages of grief for the children and their parents' death. The first stage being denial, where in the first episode, they're just looking over their house and not believing what happened. Then there's anger, which happens in spurts, like where Klaus shouts out that they're being passed around like hot potatoes after a parent's death, or various spurts of anger at either their guardians or Mr. Poe. Then there's bargaining. Some examples are where the children decide Uncle Monty's a good guardian, even if our parents are died, he can still be our new parent. Or where they're like, at least Angeline's trying, we should try and make this work. And then there's depression. And depression was mostly in episodes 5 and 6, where they're realizing there's nothing they can do, because Count Olaf's going to keep chasing them, and their parents aren't there to help them. And now, finally, we have acceptance, the most important stage of them all. This whole episode, the children have constantly had their parents' shadow looming over them. The reason they're here is because of their parents. They came here to find out their parents more, stayed to clear their names and find out what they were hiding. But everything has been about their parents so far. All their decisions, their fate at Lucky Smells Lumber Mill, has been decided entirely by their parents, even though their parents aren't really alive. But their parents are dead, so no matter what secrets they left behind, no matter what they did when they were alive, whether they set fires or not, were good people or bad people, they're gone. The Baudelaires can't live by them anymore. There's so much they don't know about their parents, but that doesn't matter anymore. All that matters is they're dead. And all that's left is what Violet, Klaus, and Sunny remember them by. The moment Klaus said, "The parents I remember would have wanted us to help," hits the hardest. The Baudelaires have finally accepted their parents' death. It's fully sunk in. They understand there's no going back. Their parents are gone, but they can still live by the values they remember them by. And finally, Violet agrees, and they agree to go back and help the mill workers. But unfortunately, Sir catches them, and he basically takes them for another personal meeting, basically just the conduct hearing to address what's going to happen to them. And he tells them if they make another mistake, he is sending them to live with Shirley, aka Count Olaf. And they do an interesting thing on this where he's like, it will build character, and then we all know what that means. It's just something, as Klaus said, it's just what people say to make others accept a bad situation. And Violet and Klaus try to get through to Sir and explain what's really going on, but he doesn't care. And then hypnotized Charles convinces Sir to be tough on the kids. So now they're in an even worse situation. So the kids have a few moments to themselves after this where they kind of joke around a bit, and we get another touching moment where Violet basically tells her brother, "I don't want you to go away again, but we know it's going to happen because that's how the story is going to end up going. There wouldn't be a final act without it." And the kids basically now have to try and find the word that will wake everybody up, but they're just resort to using the dictionary to guess random words. And I think it's kind of fitting how Klaus kind of falls asleep over the dictionary. It's kind of fitting to his character because he's obsessed with books. And so Klaus falls asleep. And now we cut back to the characters that I didn't expect them to reappear in the story after the whole parents twist. But the parents actually appear again. And that's because this other family, even though they're not the Baudelaire's parents, they're still important to the story. So the parents are basically they find the newspaper again. I guess it's a similar newspaper, just updated to the first one they found at the end of the first episode, and it says Baudelaire fire an accident, and they're basically discussing fire a lot. They say we have to mount a vigorous fire defense. There are fires all around us, and the children start to notice something's up. Like their parents are acting really weird. They're talking a lot about fire, and the parents are like, "We have a big day tomorrow," and it's again another one of those situations where like we'll explain everything tomorrow, and then obviously they're not going to be able to explain tomorrow. And this is the like the biggest thing. I didn't see like this happening in this episode, but there's right outside we see a disguised arsonist. We see like somebody that's just in some convertible car, and that we can't see their face at all. We can't even see their figure. They're completely disguised. And they have the spyglass as well. I should mention the parents, the other set of parents. The dad like opened the drawer and took his own spyglass. So they all have the spyglass. That's how everything's connected somehow. And the arsonist uses the spyglass to set the fire. It cracks open the glass and it sets fire on the paper of a picture of the family, and the house starts burning. So now we have another fire, another similar circumstance of the parents and orphans that are basically going to be exactly like the Baudelaires. So then we cut back to the lumber mill, and it's not much of a reveal, but the foreman is the hook-handed man. I think I mentioned that earlier, and he basically goes to wake up. He wakes up Klaus, says the words "lucky boy," and now he's under their command again, and Klaus basically goes to the working stations again. Whatever you call it, the central part of the lumber mill where all the machines are. And then Violet realizes he's gone, wakes up a bit later, and then she takes Sunny, and they both go to the lumber mill. And they get there pretty late. And by this point, Charles, who, if you remember, he was hypnotized also by Dr. Orwell, he's tied up on one of those wooden planks that's going to be cut in half, and the machine's basically going to, when Klaus is just going to have to push the lever, and then the log goes towards the machine, and the saw slices the log and Charles in half. Which, that's pretty brutal. I'm not going to lie. And so Violet comes there, but it's too late. Klaus isn't listening to her, obviously, because he's hypnotized. And Count Olaf, this is the first time, really, that Count Olaf actually has a long interaction with the Baudelaires, which is unusual, because usually he has several of those throughout the episode. But this is the first time we really get a Count Olaf scene that's not Count Olaf just being there and arguing with Dr. Orwell. This is the first actual Count Olaf scene. And he basically gives his whole spiel. Violet basically gets stopped by his henchman, the hook-handed man. He's the only henchman there right now. The rest of his troop I don't know what they're doing, but they're not in the story. But they kept the best one, obviously. So he catches her, and Olaf gives his whole spiel. He's like, "Wherever you go, I will hunt you down. I'm stronger, I'm smarter, and I'm unstoppable." And then he basically commands Klaus to move the log into the saw so that Charles is going to die. But then Count Olaf's henchman, the hook-handed man, he gets too giddy talking about what's going to happen, and so does Count Olaf. And the hook-handed man basically says, "Wait till Sir sees his partner's been chopped into boards. I bet he won't even wait till morning to fire." And then Olaf stops him, but it's too late. He said the word fire. And suddenly, Charles awakens from his hypnosis and starts panicking because he realizes he's being sent to his death. And I can't imagine how scary that would be. Like, you're just, one minute you're in the optometrist chair, and the next, you wake up and you're suddenly careening into your death and being sent there right into a machine that you helped create. So, yeah, that's pretty scary. But Violet realizes fire is the word, and then she tries to unhypnotize Klaus with it, but obviously, it's a different word. They didn't use the same word. But it is the word that all the mill workers were hypnotized by, and she puts two and two together because earlier in the episode, if you remember, they said they're not allowed to talk about the fire because it's quote-unquote too terrible. But the real reason is because it'll awaken them. So once again, like, the hook-handed man, like, loses track. He kind of sets off the whole thing, and he loses track of Violet. Violet goes into the foreman's booth where everybody hears what she's saying, where the foreman usually wakes everyone up from, and she broadcasts the word fire like 10 times through, like, to everybody. Everybody wakes up and hears the word fire, and then they're all unhypnotized. And so now they all realize what's going on. They realize they've been hypnotized and they just go like, how long have this been? And then one of the guys is like, why does my mouth taste like gum? And they all start marching towards the central factory where everyone is, and it's like a protest. They're like, we want fair wages, we want freedom, and they're marching towards there. Olaf catches Violet. He realizes what she done, so the hook-handed man put this giant wooden bar. I don't know how they found a bar this big to block the door from this angry mob of like 50 people trying to break through the door. And so that stalls them for the moment, and then Olaf wants Klaus to cut the log faster, so he says, Lucky, would you like to move the log faster? And then Violet realizes what the trick is, so she says, Lucky, would you like to reverse the direction of the log? And they keep going back and forth a few times, but then Dr. Orwell shows up and says, Lucky, don't listen to your sister. And then, so obviously now Violet can't do anything, and Dr. Orwell just suddenly showed up, and it's a bit of a joke. Like, she knew some secret way in that she didn't tell Olaf. And kind of, I forgot to mention, throughout this episode, they've been kind of planting seeds of dissent, like how Olaf and Dr. Orwell are kind of, they're working together, but they're also like kind of romantically and not romantically involved, because they're like they have a lot of quarrels. They're really mad at each other. So Dr. Orwell shows up and basically brags about being better than Olaf, and like, this wasn't going well, and I'm glad I came to check, otherwise this whole thing would have failed, which he might be right about that, but probably not. And then Sunny was actually, I forgot to mention also, Sunny was chewing the rope that was keeping Charles bound, and trying to free Charles, but Dr. Orwell goes and finds Sunny, and now basically Violet's being held by Count Olaf, and Sunny's being held by Dr. Orwell, and literally held right in front of a burning furnace, and Klaus is still hypnotized, so they're completely trapped. But then Count Olaf leaves Violet to argue with Dr. Orwell after Dr. Orwell says, Lucky, would you like to move the log into the saw again? And then Klaus starts moving it again, and now Charles is going back towards to the machine, and he's going to die. But Count Olaf and Dr. Orwell have their little argument, and he's like, it's kind of a breakup where Count Olaf's kind of frustrated by how complicated this is. He's like, my plots are all simple, so yeah, I'm breaking up with you. I don't want to use any more of these high-tech gimmicks again. This is too complicated and stuff. And then, like, Dr. Orwell's offended that he's breaking up with her again, and they kind of have been back and forth, and it's like, you're being insensitive, and then Count Olaf says, you're being ignorant. It's like, don't say the word. And that's when Violet realizes what the word is, because from the two previous times, it was inordinate. Sir had said, this mistake had cost me an inordinate amount of money. And the first time, Violet said, I miss you, an inordinate amount. And then so she says the word to Klaus, and he's unhypnotized, and then he stops the machine, and Charles stops moving towards it, and he only has a small cut on his foot. So now that's over, so Charles is free now, and the tension's kind of released, but not completely. So what happens next is, so Klaus is obviously back, and now he and Violet are like, just let Sunny go. You can have her fortune if you want. Just leave Sunny alone. Don't kill her. And then Dr. Orwell kind of laughed him off, like, you really think this is all about the fortune? And this part's really important because it implies, like, this is also personal for her, which we saw at the beginning when Count Olaf recruited her. What the only reason she was working with him is because he said, what if we had another chance to destroy the Baudelaires? And so she clearly has some sort of rivalry with their parents, and she brings that up here where she's like, your parents told me this and this and this, and I couldn't do this and I couldn't do this, but they were all wrong. Look at what I'm doing now. And it was never about the fortune. And right at that moment, when she's like holding Sunny there, and the kids, Violet and Klaus, are like, there's nothing we can do. And then the angry mob comes to the rescue because they break through the door finally. The hook-handed man gets out of the way because she's like, I can't hold them anymore. And they storm through. Dr. Orwell is startled, and she backs into the fire, and luckily for the kids, the startledness, like her arm also goes upwards, and she throws Sunny into the air, and Violet catches Sunny. And so Dr. Orwell was right. There was a fatal accident at the Lucky Smells lumber mill, and it was Dr. Orwell. In the picture that Lemony Snicket showed earlier, where it was kind of implied those were Klaus's glasses, they weren't. They were Dr. Orwell, and she was the one that died at Lucky Smells lumber mill. And while this whole scene is going on, we do see more Lemony Snicket narration about when to shout fire, and while we see that as well, we also cut to the other household burning, the ones with the not Baudelaire parents, but the other family, and their house is burning down. So we also get to see, after this whole thing, when the angry mob startles Dr. Orwell and she dies, then right after that, Count Olaf looks at Hooky and he's like, yeah, let's get out of here. And they basically just jump through some glass, which must have hurt. They don't go over that, but that has to hurt. And basically leaves his wig behind, and Count Olaf is just friskily running. He's like, how does anybody run in these stupid high heels? And they go to the end of the fence, and basically Hooky boosts Olaf over the fence, and they leave, and now Count Olaf has escaped again. So really, this whole ordeal was just about Dr. Orwell, because Count Olaf didn't really do much in this episode. I mean, he was officially the last one there, but this episode was really about the Baudelaires themselves. It was about their parents and getting over them, and it was also about Dr. Orwell and her connections with the Baudelaire family. So Count Olaf just got away again, and the Baudelaires are just watching, and just like, okay, he got away again, I guess we'll have to deal with him again this time, but at least we're out of this situation. Dr. Orwell is gone, and next thing you know, Sir comes in because he hears all this commotion, and he's like, I fully approve of this night shift, and then all the workers obviously don't take well to him after having been hypnotized for, I don't actually know how long they were hypnotized. It seems like it's been years, but they all rebel against him, and they go after him, and Sir escapes, and he basically has to crawl his way out. And then we cut to the next day where Eleanor Poe actually finds them because she heard about an accident, and she takes the picture that ultimately we all see that Lemony Snicket uses in the newspaper, and that is foreshadowed throughout this entire episode, but obviously the picture was of Dr. Orwell, not Klaus. And Mr. Poe returns, and Mr. Poe hasn't changed one bit. Okay, I'll take that back. He has changed a bit, but he hasn't changed in terms of how he treats the children. Like, he still goes like, you guys have very lively imaginations when they talk. Apparently, I guess they tried to tell him about Count Olaf and Dr. Orwell and how Klaus was hypnotized, but he's like, hypnotism, Count Olaf in a dress, you must have very lively imaginations. It's I mean, some things don't change at all. Mr. Poe is still Mr. Poe. So after that, the kids are basically, they realize, what did they really accomplish? I mean, they came here to find secrets about their parents. They didn't find anything. And so they're just trying to count their small victories, like Dr. Orwell won't show up again, or that they know their parents and start the fire. And then Charles comes over, and if you remember, I think I actually had forgotten to mention this part. So after Sir redacted the page and he talked to Charles about the deal to cover things up, Sir had tried to burn the paper that he ripped out that had the truth about the fire, but Charles saved it, and he was going to give it to Violet, but then, remember, he said, meet me after lunch, but he couldn't because then Dr. Orwell hypnotized him. So Charles is there, he kind of says goodbye to them, and then he gives them the paper. And so I guess you could say they finally at least get some closure on their parents because it says the Baudelaires were unequivocally responsible for putting out the fire and helping the survivors get back on their feet. So at least there's that. They have to count whatever small victory they get because Count Olaf is still out there. He's still going to come after them. And now they're back with Mr. Poe. And we all know, Mr. Poe isn't exactly going to help them against Count Olaf. So they go out, they see Phil, and Phil is like his usual optimistic stuff. He's like, look on the bright side, you're alive. And so they're I guess like these small victories, it gives them some temporary happiness. And then Mr. Poe has to drive them to their next quote unquote guardian. We find out what it really is. But again, I feel like they're going to go back to the formula, unfortunately, because we see Mr. Poe driving them again, which I don't know how many times we've seen Mr. Poe driving them to their next destination. And I really liked how they broke the formula here. Like, they had the first 3 episodes do the same thing, and they had this be completely different, and it really worked. And Mr. Poe drives them, but it is going to be different because he's dropping them to a boarding school. And that makes sense because after everything that's happened with the previous 3 Guardians, like, nobody's going to want to take the Baudelaires in. And honestly, at this point, I can't blame them because they don't really know what's going on, but they know, like, well, if we take them in, then Count Olaf's going to come after us and something bad's going to happen. We're going to die or something's going to, or they're, whatever. And so the Baudelaires are dropped off at the boarding school. And again, this boarding school looks really depressing. It looked like a graveyard, but Mr. Poe drops them off. He kind of gives a whole spiel about how great boarding schools are, how he wished he always went to one. And it's at this point in the story where Mr. Poe is literally the nicest he's ever been, because he drops them off. And he actually kind of gives them a parting greeting. Like, he tries to tell them. I guess his relationship or how he actually feels about the Baudelaires is kind of complicated because all he really cares about is his job, which makes sense. But and when he was worried earlier in the story, it was mostly because of his job. But he also does kind of feel responsible for them, he doesn't feel any accountability for them. So he feels responsibility, but not accountability for anything that might go wrong. So he does try to say goodbye to them. It comes off as very, like, whatever, I'm just saying it for the sake of saying it. But I do think Mr. Poe does actually feel some responsibility for them. And I think that was a nice cap to his character for the first season. And in this episode, Mr. Poe was more tolerable in this episode than any of the previous episodes. So that was good on him. And so the Baudelaires just realized, well, now we're just stuck in another location. We're still lost, and we're all alone again. And Violet kind of says that with the finality after Mr. Poe gives Klaus a package. And that package, if you remember, his secretary had promised to get the spyglass back to Klaus, and she did. She had it delivered to the bank, and Mr. Poe gives it to Klaus, and it's the object he found in the fire, which is half of the spyglass. So then the Baudelaires just have to basically sit at the boarding school and wait till they're called in. And it's at this point in the story where they actually end it quite interestingly. So they have the other pair of orphans, remember the kids of the fake parents, the one, not the actual Baudelaire parents, but the parents we thought were the Baudelaire parents, before they ultimately revealed that they weren't actually the Baudelaire parents. And then, if you remember, their house burnt down while the whole Lucky Smells thing was going on. It's seemingly like been a few weeks. They've probably been through the same thing. And then they're also there at the boarding school, and we see kind of an image of the Baudelaires and that other pair of orphans. They each have half of the spyglass, and they're sitting on each side of the bench, and so it's kind of implied the Baudelaires are going to meet up with them, and they're going to have to put the puzzle together. So the final image of the episode is with Lemony Snicket and Count Olaf in an old picture of the drama club. They're both really young. They look really happy. They have their arms around each other and stuff. It looks like they were really good friends, but clearly something happened because now Olaf is really evil, and Lemony describes him as that. So I look forward to seeing what happened there, because that seems to be really important. And the story ends basically with all the characters singing about how there's no happy endings, and this you can hope as much as you want for things to go well. You can hope that the kids are going to eventually end up happy, that they'll eventually be able to escape this, but it's not going to happen because that's not how the story goes. And it's a nice song. It's weird. It was really weird when I first watched it, but I like it. When I first heard like the starting scene, I was like, "What's going on?" But by the end of the song, I was like, "You know what? I dig it." Except for the parts where Mr. Poe shows up and he keeps coughing, like when the kids are singing, when Olaf is singing, when Lemony's singing. Yeah, that's nice. And then Mr. Poe comes on screen, and it's not only the worst part of the song, we have to hear him like vocalizing and also coughing incessantly, and I don't like that part of it. But it does put a good capper to the season and what it was all about. What I mean by that is, at times it feels like a children's adventure, and at times it feels like a Freudian tragedy. And in a lot of children's adventures, what happens is the children, they're inexperienced, they're naive, and they have to go on this journey of self-discovery, basically. They go into a fictional world, they're in the real world, and then they go into this fictional world. Sometimes this fictional world is often just mystical, or it could be magical, or it could some of them have really, like, friendly tones, and some of them can be really nightmarish tones. They go into this weird world, but it ultimately teaches them a lot. They grow as people because of it. They have to go through a lot of difficulties because of it. And ultimately, they escape from the world. They overcome their difficulties and challenges. And they ultimately win and get back into the real world and become better because of it. And now their lives are normal again, like they were in the beginning. They've gotten over this bad part of their lives. And now they're back in the normal world. And things are going to be happy and they'll be better off because of what they learned. But that's not how things work here. Because Count Olaf is still out there. They didn't really win in the end. The Baudelaires didn't win. They just escaped. And for them, that's really all they can win. All they can win is just delaying Count Olaf coming after them for longer. And delaying all these terrible things happening to them because they're always going to happen. And so by the end of this episode, I mean, it did kind of actually feel happy for once, and like the 5 to 10 minutes following when Count Olaf escapes up till where Mr. Poe drops them off. But then you're kind of hit with that reminder, like, well, what's really going to happen next? I mean, now they've just been cast out to this random school. And presumably the same thing can just happen over and over again, and now they're alone. Like Violet said, they're alone. They have to, and they didn't really learn anything about their lives. The mysteries are still haunting them, and they're still orphans. Like, unfortunately, this whole, like I said, this is why I like the Parents Twist so much. The whole season was leading up to like them eventually returning to their parents. And when I first watched this, I did feel like that was going to be the return to the real world, like the children's adventure, this other world that they have to go through and deal with all these problems. Those are the first 3 episodes, and finally they'd end up overcoming it and reuniting with their parents, and then their lives would become better because of it, and maybe they'd actually be able to live out lives. So, but then the Parents Twist happened, and that's kind of the moment that ultimately sets this all off, and how it's not going to be that kind of story. The children this is their reality. Count Olaf and all those problems, they were not another world that they just went into. This is the real world, and anything else that had to do, the parents, all that's just a dream. It's a pipe dream. It's something that they'll never have again. So overall, I thought these 2 episodes were great. I thought they were the best of the series by far. Both parts 1 and part 2, and something I noted was, like, in part 1, it was already feeling like one of the best episodes of the series. I was like, this might just be the best episode of the series so far, like 3/4 through the episode, but there's just that something missing, that was the case for all of the episodes. There was always something missing, and that was the same for part 1 of The Miserable Mill, and I was waiting for that something to hit, something to take it to the next level, that would really cement itself. And then it happened. The parents' twist happened, and that was really what took everything to the next level, and I loved it. So I think I'd rate part one a very strong 8.5. It was really good, and that's by far the best rating of any episode of the series. And then part two, I feel like part two is even better because now that even though now we have the parents out of the way, and now we can we focus on the kids and we focus on how they're gonna get out of this. This is like mentally this each episode gets harder and harder. In the first episode, as tough as bad as it is that Count Olaf's like trying to marry Violet and get their fortune, it's really it's not as mentally taxing on them because they're just trying to escape, they're trying to cope, and everything's moving so fast. And then in the second one, it gets higher because now he killed Monty, and they have to deal with that. And that while trying to get Count Olaf and escape from him, they still have to deal with the fact that he's willing to murder people to get to them. And there's also probably going to be a bit of guilt factor there because of them, Count Olaf is killing all these people, and it's all Count Olaf's fault. They're not at fault for Monty and Josephine's death, but you are going to feel that way when that's the way things happen. And then you have the third episode, which is even more mentally taxing, and that's where they really make the big jump. And that's where we deal with their depression of their parents' death. We deal with how people deal with grief, both through Aunt Josephine, and we see how the kids deal with it. And then they go from like from just seeing the remains of their parents' ashes, and then seeing Uncle Monty's body, and then literally seeing Count Olaf murder Aunt Josephine in cold blood. And then in this episode, now it gets even worse because now in terms of getting mentally taxing, Klaus has literally been hypnotized, so he doesn't even know what he's doing, and he's being controlled by somebody else. And now they have to deal with that, and now they have no one else to depend on. In the past, as bad as Mr. Poe is, at least he was some outside figure that they could depend on, even if he wasn't that helpful at all. But now they're basically completely on their own. They have to somehow find a way out of it, and they do. But even after all that, none of it really matters. And I really loved the way they handled the ending of the episode. They don't make it so that everything's good now. Which obviously there are more seasons, so yes, obviously it's not going to be good. But even if you look at just this season of itself, it is a good ending. But it lets you know things are not going to go well, which is really unusual for an ending, but that's what I like about it. And I like how they did the whole scene with ultimately Dr. Orwell dying, but how they started it, how Violet ultimately remembered what the word was, and also the resolution they gave to Sir. And I like how Charles kind of brought up a few good points about how like things aren't always black and white. I mean, Sir, like, he looks like a jerk, he looks like an awful person, but Charles is the only one in the show that actually knows him, and it's not that simple. People aren't that simple. They're not simply jerks or great people. And finally, I also loved all the world building they did in terms of the other sets of parents, the other orphans, and Lemony Snicket being dead or supposedly dead that everybody thinks he's dead, and that he knew Count Olaf in the past. So I'm teetering on part two. I think I'll give it an 8.5. I was thinking of giving it a 9. It was almost that good, but I feel like if I give it a 9, then like everything else, I'll have to lower my rating for everything else, increase my rating for everything else, because if I give it a 9, I feel like I'm holding it to too low of a standard, and I need to keep it at the high standard I hold everything to. So I'm gonna give part 2 an 8.5, and overall, I rate the episode an 8.5. It was very good and a very satisfying ending to season 1, and a good setup for the next season and whatever is gonna happen next. If you guys are still here, thank you so much for watching. Please do like the video and subscribe to the channel. Please leave any feedback down below if you have any. I would really appreciate it. And we will be back next time with another review. Thank you.